The soft glow of the television flickered across the living room, casting an eerie light over the empty space. Sarah sat curled up on the couch, mindlessly flipping through the channels, her attention only half focused on the screen. It had been a long and tiring day at work, and all she wanted was to unwind in front of the TV with a glass of wine. As she settled deeper into the cushions, the room was suddenly plunged into total darkness. Sarah jumped, her heart racing. What she muttered, fumbling around for the lamp on the end table. But her hand grasped only empty air. Panic started to set in as she realized the power had gone out. "Okay, stay calm," she told herself, taking a deep breath. She pulled out her phone, but the screen remained black. "No, no, no," she whispered, frantically pressing the power button. The battery must have died. Cursing under her breath, she felt around on the coffee table for the flashlight she kept there, but it was nowhere to be found. Sarah sat in the suffocating blackness, her eyes straining to adjust. She could barely make out the outlines of the furniture around her. Her pulse pounded in her ears as a cold chill ran down her spine. She hated the dark, hated feeling so vulnerable and exposed. Steeling her nerves, she slowly stood up, carefully making her way across the living room toward the kitchen, where she knew there were some emergency candles. Each step felt like an eternity, and she had to fight the urge to just stand still, paralyzed by fear. As she reached the kitchen doorway, her foot caught on something, and she stumbled, nearly losing her balance. Cursing, she reached out to steady herself, her hands grasping at the air. She froze, listening intently, but the only sound was the pounding of her own heart. Cautiously, she continued on, her hands outstretched, feeling her way along the countertop. Her fingers finally found the drawer where she kept the candles and matches. Breathing a sigh of relief, she pulled one out and struck the match, the tiny flame flickering to life. The warm glow illuminated a small circle around her, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Sarah peered around the kitchen, her eyes searching for anything that could have caused her to trip. But the floor was clear, save for a few stray crumbs. She shook her head, trying to calm her nerves. "It was probably just my own two left feet," she muttered, chuckling nervously. Holding the candle steady, she made her way back to the living room, scanning the area for the flashlight. As she neared the couch, a loud crash came from the direction of the front door, making her jump and nearly drop the candle. Heart racing, she whirled around, the flickering light casting eerie shadows across the room. "Hello," she called out, her voice quivering. "Is someone there?" Silence. Silence. Sarah strained to hear any other sounds, but the house was eerily quiet. Swallowing hard, she slowly made her way toward the front door, her eyes darting around nervously. As she reached the entryway, she gasped. The door was wide open, a gust of cold wind sending the curtains fluttering. "Oh God," she whispered, her hands trembling as she peered outside. The porch light was out, and the darkness beyond the threshold was impenetrable. Clutching the candle, she quickly shut and locked the door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Okay, think Sarah," she muttered, pacing back and forth. "The power's out, the phone's dead, and the door's been left open. What do I do?" She glanced around the room, desperately searching for something, anything that could help her. Her eyes landed on the fireplace, and an idea began to form. Hurrying over, she set the candle down on the mantel and started rummaging through the kindling and logs, searching for something to use as a makeshift weapon. Her fingers finally closed around a thick, sturdy piece of firewood, and she gripped it tightly, holding it at the ready. Cautiously, she made her way back to the front door, her grip tightening on the piece of firewood. Peering out the window, she could see nothing but inky blackness beyond. Swallowing hard, she slowly unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack, straining to hear any sounds from outside. The eerie silence was deafening. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out onto the porch, the wooden plank creaking beneath her feet. She scanned the area, the flickering candle light casting long, ominous shadows. But there was no sign of an intruder, no indication that anything was amiss. Letting out a shaky sigh of relief, she turned to go back inside, when suddenly a movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. Whirling around, she held up the makeshift weapon, her heart pounding. But there was nothing there, just the swaying trees and the inky blackness beyond. "Get a grip, Sarah," she muttered, shaking her head. She was letting her imagination run wild. With one last cautious glance around, she stepped back inside and quickly shut the door, locking it securely behind her. As she made her way back to the living room, the flickering candle light revealed a trail of muddy footprints leading from the front door. Sarah froze, her eyes widening in horror. Someone had been in her house. Gripping the firewood tightly, she slowly followed the trail, her senses on high alert. The footprints led to the kitchen, and she peered around the corner, her breath catching in her throat. The drawers were all pulled open, their contents strewn across the floor. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the intruder must still be in the house, somewhere. Clutching the makeshift weapon, she began to carefully make her way upstairs, each step creaking beneath her feet. The darkness seemed to press in around her, and she could feel the panic rising in her chest. As she reached the top of the stairs, a sudden movement in the hallway made her jump. She whirled around, the candle light flickering wildly. And there, in the shadows, she caught a glimpse of a figure, a tall, dark shape, moving stealthily towards her. Sarah opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. She stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror. As the figure drew closer, she could hear its ragged breathing, feel its presence looming over her. And then, in a sudden, chilling moment, it was right there, just inches away. Sarah sat in the darkness, her heart pounding in her ears. Her eyes had finally adjusted, and she could just make out the outlines of the furniture around her. But the room was still shrouded in impenetrable blackness, and the sense of dread that had been building inside her only seemed to intensify. Suddenly, a faint sound reached her ears, a soft, barely perceptible rustling, coming from the far corner of the room. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat as she strained to listen. The sound grew louder, closer, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Slowly, painfully slowly, she turned her head, her eyes searching the darkness. And there, in the corner, she saw a dark, shapeless form, moving with a sinister, deliberate purpose. Sarah's heart raced as she realized she was not alone. The form drew nearer, and she could feel its presence, its cold, unearthly energy, enveloping her. She wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed by fear, her body refusing to obey her desperate commands. And then, in the silence, a voice low, raspy, and utterly chilling whispered directly into her ear. "I found you." It was a dark and stormy night when my parents told me they would be leaving for the weekend. I couldn't believe my luck, the house all to myself. As they packed their bags, I tried to contain my excitement. "Now, you be good while we're gone." "All right," my mom said, giving me a stern look. "I will. I promise," I replied, trying to sound as innocent as possible. After they left, I had the whole house to myself. No chores, no homework, just endless hours of blissful freedom. I grabbed a snack from the kitchen and plopped down in front of the TV, flipping through the channels. Nothing good was on, so I settled on a cheesy horror movie. As the opening credits rolled, I felt a sense of unease creep up my spine. The old, creaky house suddenly felt a lot bigger and lonelier without my parents around. I tried to push the feeling aside and focus on the movie, but my mind kept wandering. What if there was some kind of intruder? I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the paranoid thoughts. I was being ridiculous. The doors were locked, the house was secure. Nothing was going to happen. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a sudden thud coming from the front hall. My heart leapt into my throat as I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of the front door slamming shut. "Mom?" "Dad," I called out, my voice shaking. "Is that you?" No response. I slowly rose from the couch, my legs wobbling slightly. Cautiously, I made my way to the front door, peering out the window. It was locked tight. A chill ran down my spine. If the door had slammed shut, then how? Swallowing hard, I turned and hurried back to my room, glancing around nervously. Everything seemed to be in order, except my eyes landed on my favorite stuffed animal, Mr. Snuggles, who was sitting on the edge of my bed, his position slightly askew from where I had left him. My breath caught in my throat. I distinctly remembered placing him in the center of the bed before I sat down to watch TV. Hands trembling, I approached the bed and gingerly picked up Mr. Snuggles, examining him closely. Had I really moved him without realizing it? No, that couldn't be right. Someone or something had been in my room. I dropped the stuffed animal back onto the bed, my heart pounding. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. I must have imagined it. Surely there was a perfectly logical explanation. Forcing myself to take a deep breath, I decided to do a quick sweep of the house, just to be sure. I checked every room, every closet, every nook and cranny, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The house was silent, save for the pounding of my own heart. Relieved, I returned to my room, collapsing onto the bed. I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild. Nothing was wrong, everything was fine. My parents would be back in a couple of days and I would be able to laugh about this whole incident. Just as I was starting to relax, a flash of movement outside my window caught my eye. I froze, staring intently at the glass. For a moment I thought I saw a shadowy figure dart across the yard. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly approached the window, peering out into the darkness. There, in the faint light of the street lamp, I saw my neighbor, Mr. Smith, slowly making his way across my lawn, clutching something in his hands. My stomach twisted with dread as I recognized the familiar shape of Mr. Snuggles. What was he doing with my toy? I watched, transfixed, as Mr. Smith carefully placed the stuffed animal on the ground, then began searching the area, muttering to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but the way he was acting sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly he looked up, his eyes scanning the house. I quickly ducked down, my heart pounding. Had he seen me? I waited, holding my breath, but heard no sound of movement outside. Cautiously, I peeked out the window again, but Mr. Smith had vanished. The lawn was empty, save for the lone figure of Mr. Snuggles sitting in the grass. I stared at the toy, an uneasy feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. What was going on? Why was my neighbor skulking around my yard, handling my belongings? A million questions raced through my mind, but no answers presented themselves. Slowly, I backed away from the window, my eyes glued to the stuffed animal outside. I had to get a closer look, had to understand what was happening. Quietly, I slipped out of my room and made my way downstairs, my heart pounding with each step. The house was eerily silent, save for the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. When I reached the front door, I paused, my hand hovering over the lock. Should I go out there? What if Mr. Smith was still lurking around? But I had to know, had to understand. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the door and cracked it open, peering outside. The yard was empty, the only movement coming from the gentle sway of the trees in the breeze. Steeling my nerves, I stepped outside, my eyes immediately drawn to Mr. Snuggles. I approached the toy cautiously, half expecting it to spring to life and attack me. But it remained still, innocuous, as if it had never been touched. I knelt down, running my fingers over the soft fabric. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Brow furrowed, I glanced around the yard, searching for any sign of Mr. Smith. But he had vanished, like a specter in the night. With a sigh, I picked up the stuffed animal and headed back inside, locking the door firmly behind me. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Mr. Smith's strange behavior, the way he had handled my toy doll, felt so off. Once back in my room, I placed Mr. Snuggles on the bed, staring at him intently. Had he really been moved, or was I just imagining things? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away. I was being paranoid, that's all. There was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. Determined to distract myself, I turned on the TV, hoping to lose myself in something mindless. But try as I might, I couldn't focus. My gaze kept drifting back to the window, half expecting to see Mr. Smith lurking out there. As the minutes ticked by, the house grew darker and more oppressive. Shadows seemed to creep in from every corner, and the old floorboards groaned with each passing moment. I found myself jumping at every little sound, my nerves on edge. Finally, I could take it no more. I had to get out of this house, had to get away from the stifling silence and the ever-present feeling of being watched. Grabbing my jacket, I hurried downstairs and out the front door, not even bothering to lock it behind me. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, and I took a deep, steadying breath. Glancing around, I saw that the yard was still empty, save for Mr. Snuggles sitting forlornly in the grass. I shuddered, quickly looking away. Without a clear destination in mind, I started walking, my feet carrying me down the familiar streets of my neighborhood. The streetlights cast an eerie glow and the shadows seemed to dance and twist around me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my ears. As I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Whirling around, I felt my blood run cold. There, standing at the end of the street, was the unmistakable figure of Mr. Smith. He was just standing there, staring at me, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. What was he doing out here? And why was he watching me? 1,000 scenarios flashed through my mind, each more terrifying than the last. Suddenly, Mr. Smith began to move, his steps slow and deliberate as he made his way towards me. I felt a surge of panic, and, without a second thought, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the pavement. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't dare slow down. The sound of my own frantic footsteps was the only thing I could hear, drowning out any other noise. I had to get away, had to put as much distance between myself and Mr. Smith as possible. Finally, I reached the main road, the bright lights and bustling activity of the town center providing a sense of safety. I slowed to a stop, doubling over and gulping in deep breaths of air. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Glancing back the way I had come, I saw no sign of Mr. Smith. Had he given up the chase, or was he still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Deciding I couldn't risk going back home, I pulled out my phone and quickly called the only person I could think of, my best friend, Sarah. She answered on the second ring, her voice laced with concern. "Hey, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I quickly explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a rush. Sarah listened intently, her sharp intake of breath the only indication of her growing alarm. "Oh my God, that's terrifying. Where are you now? Do you want me to come pick you up?" "I'm at the main road, near the diner," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "Please, Sarah, I don't know what to do. Mr. Smith, he was following me." Okay, just stay there." "I'm on my way," she said, her tone reassuring. "Don't worry, I'll be there as fast as I can." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me feeling shaky and vulnerable. I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see Mr. Smith lurking in the shadows. The normally bustling street felt eerily quiet and deserted. As I waited for Sarah, I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Why had Mr. Smith been in my house, handling my belongings? And why had he followed me out here? Was he dangerous? The questions swirled in my mind, but I had no answers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted Sarah's car pulling up to the curb. I hurried over, yanking open the door and practically falling into the passenger seat. "Drive, Sarah. Drive," I practically shouted, my voice laced with panic. She didn't hesitate, her foot pressing down on the gas pedal as we sped away from the main road. I glanced frantically out the rear window, but there was no sign of Mr. Smith. "Okay, what the hell is going on?" Sarah demanded, her eyes wide with concern. "You're scaring me." I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "It's Mr. Smith, Sarah. He was in my house, and then he followed me. I think he's after me or something. I don't know what to do." Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. "That's messed up. Do you think he's dangerous?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared, Sarah. What if he comes after me again?" "Don't worry, you're safe with me," Sarah reassured, her tone firm. "We'll figure this out, I promise. In the meantime, let's get you somewhere safe, okay?" I nodded, feeling a small measure of relief. As long as I was with Sarah, I knew I would be okay. But the nagging fear in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. What was Mr. Smith's game, and would he stop at nothing to get to me? The old, creaky farmhouse loomed before me, the last rays of the setting sun casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I pulled my coat tighter as a chill wind whipped through the barren trees. I couldn't believe I had agreed to this. Why did I let my wife Amelia talk me into house sitting for her aunt and uncle while they were away on vacation? I should be at home right now, relaxing in my favorite chair with a good book and a glass of whiskey, not standing out here in the middle of nowhere, about to spend the night alone in this God-forsaken place. But Amelia had insisted. "It will be good for you, Jack," she had said. "Get you out of the city for a little while, clear your head. And Aunt Edith and Uncle Thomas will be so grateful. Plus, they're paying us handsomely to look after the place." I sighed, knowing there was no point in arguing. Amelia had made up her mind, and once she did that, there was no changing it. So here I was, staring up at the dilapidated farmhouse, my trepidation growing with each passing moment. I trudged up the creaky wooden steps of the wraparound porch, the old boards groaning under my weight. Fumbling in my pocket, I retrieved the large, old-fashioned key Amelia's aunt had given me. Taking a deep breath, I inserted it into the lock and turned. The door swung open with an ominous creak, and I stepped inside, my eyes immediately drawn to the grand staircase that dominated the entryway. The air was thick with the scent of must and decay, and I wrinkled my nose in disgust. Flicking on the lights, I surveyed the interior. The place was in a state of disrepair, with peeling wallpaper, dusty furniture, and a general aura of neglect. I shook my head, wondering how Amelia's aunt and uncle could stand to live in such a decrepit place. "Well, might as well get settled in," I muttered to myself, closing the door behind me and locking it securely. I made my way through the gloomy house, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The kitchen was surprisingly well stocked, and I decided to fix myself a quick dinner before turning in for the night. As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a pair of eyes peering at me from the shadows. But the house remained still and silent, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. After I finished my meal, I headed upstairs to the guest room Amelia's aunt and uncle had prepared for me. It was a small, cozy space, with a worn but comfortable-looking bed and a quaint little desk in the corner. I unpacked my bag, hung up my clothes, and changed into my pajamas, eager to get some sleep. But as I lay in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, I found that sleep eluded me. The house seemed to come alive around me, every creak and groan magnified in the stillness of the night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with uneasy thoughts. What was that strange scratching sound coming from the hallway? And was that a faint rustling in the corner of the room? I strained my ears, but the noises had ceased, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined them. Sighing, I rolled over and tried to focus on my breathing, willing myself to relax. But just as I was starting to drift off, a loud thump from downstairs jolted me wide awake. My heart pounding, I sat up in bed, straining to hear any further sounds. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard, followed by the faint patter of footsteps. My blood ran cold. Someone or something was in the house. Swallowing hard, I slowly climbed out of bed, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. Cautiously, I made my way to the door, peering out into the dark hallway. The old wooden boards creaked beneath my weight as I crept towards the staircase, my hands trembling. As I reached the top of the stairs, I paused, straining to hear any further sounds from below. The house was deathly quiet, save for the pounding of my own heart. Mustering my courage, I began to descend the steps, each one groaning under my weight. My eyes scanned the shadowy entryway, searching for any sign of an intruder. But the house remained still, an eerie stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I reached the bottom of the stairs and cautiously made my way towards the kitchen, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. As I neared the doorway, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my senses heightened, every creak and groan of the old house putting me on high alert. Steeling myself, I stepped into the kitchen, my gaze sweeping the room. Everything seemed to be in order, the dishes from my earlier meal still sitting in the sink. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a slight sense of relief. But just as I was about to turn and head back upstairs, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I whirled around, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw a dark, shadowy figure lurking in the hallway. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure seemed to be watching me, its outline barely discernible in the gloom. I strained to make out any distinguishing features, but the darkness seemed to swallow it up, leaving only a vague, menacing presence. Slowly, I began to back away, my eyes never leaving the figure. But as I did so, I felt my foot collide with something on the floor, sending a loud crash echoing through the house. The figure jerked suddenly, and I felt a surge of panic. Without a second thought, I turned and bolted for the stairs, my feet pounding against the old wooden boards as I raced upwards. I could hear the pounding of footsteps behind me, spurring me on, my lungs burning with the effort. I reached the top of the stairs and flung myself into the guest room, slamming the door behind me and locking it. Pressing my back against the wood, I listened intently, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps were getting closer, the floorboards creaking with each step. I held my breath, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the lamp on the bedside table, flooding the room with a warm, golden glow. But as the light illuminated the space, I realized, to my utter relief, that the figure was none other than my neighbor, Mr. Wilkins. He stood in the hallway, his face a mask of confusion and fear. "Mr. Wilkins," I exclaimed, my voice shaking. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" The elderly man blinked, his brow furrowed. "Your house," he stammered. "I'm terribly sorry, I must have the wrong place. I was just looking for a place to stay the night, you see, and I thought this was my friend's house." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Your friend's house?" "Mr. Wilkins, this is my aunt and uncle's place. I'm house-sitting for them while they're away." Realization dawned on the old man's face, and he let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, my boy. I must have gotten turned around in the dark. I was just looking for a place to spend the night, you see, since I seem to have lost my keys." I let out a shaky laugh, the tension in my body finally starting to dissipate. "Well, you certainly gave me a fright, Mr. Wilkins. Come on, let's get you out of here and call the police. They can help you find your keys." As we made our way out of the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It had all been a simple misunderstanding, nothing more. The strange noises and the mysterious figure had been nothing more than my neighbor, lost and confused in the dark. I breathed in the cool night air, grateful to be outside the old farmhouse once again. As we waited for the police to arrive, Mr. Wilkins apologized profusely, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so terribly sorry for the fright, my boy," he said, wringing his hands. "I was just trying to find a place to stay for the night, and I must have gotten turned around in the dark. I feel like such a fool." I patted his shoulder reassuringly. "It's all right, Mr. Wilkins. I'm just glad it was all just a misunderstanding." We sat in awkward silence for a few moments, until the distant wail of sirens broke the stillness of the night. Within minutes, a police car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights sweeping the area. "What seems to be the problem here?" one of the officers asked as they approached. I quickly explained the situation, and Mr. Wilkins sheepishly recounted how he had accidentally wandered into the wrong house while searching for a place to stay. The officers listened patiently, then turned to Mr. Wilkins. "All right, sir, let's see if we can't help you find those keys of yours. We'll give you a ride back to your place and see if we can't retrace your steps." Mr. Wilkins nodded gratefully, and the officers escorted him to the patrol car. I watched as they drove off, the flashing lights fading into the distance. With a sigh of relief, I turned and headed back towards the farmhouse, eager to put the night's events behind me. As I approached the front door, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. The house seemed to loom before me, its shadows shifting and dancing in the moonlight. Shaking off the feeling, I unlocked the door and stepped back inside, locking it securely behind me. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards. I made my way back to the guest room, my footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness. As I settled back into bed, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. All the fear and anxiety I had felt had been for naught. It had simply been a case of a confused old man, nothing more. I closed my eyes, feeling the tension in my body finally begin to dissipate. Tomorrow, I would call Amelia and tell her all about the night's events, and we would have a good laugh about it. For now, I just wanted to get some much-needed rest. As I drifted off to sleep, the old farmhouse seemed to settle around me, its creaks and groans fading into the background. The night's ordeal was over, and I could finally relax, secure in the knowledge that I was safe and sound. Little did I know, however, that the true horror of the night had yet to reveal itself.